Billy, so we're here to chat to you about trust and how complex it is in the modern world. In our last webinar, Hannah and Rich talked about the 5 pillars of trust for brands to remember and deliver consistently on. So here's a quick recap of our 5 pillars for you. Number 1 is delivering consistently. Number 2 is being transparent, honest, and accountable. Number 3 is all about strong customer service. 4, social proof and reviews. And 5, engaging well with feedback. So in today's session, we're going to reflect on how trust has become increasingly critical to consumers and in many ways, even more elusive for brands.
And when we think about trust in the context of the relationship between a consumer and a brand, this is defined as a consumer's belief in the reliability, truth, or ability of a brand to deliver against what they promise. And trust is indisputably one of the most important things for a brand to deliver and to build as well. When successful, it brings huge benefits to both brands and to customers. Yet in recent years, many of us acknowledge that trust has been in decline. And there are many different factors that are contributing towards this downward trend that we're seeing.
So for me, in that definition, there's one word in particular that really jumps out, truth. And I think that's something that is echoing quite loudly in the macro picture that we need to reflect on before we delve into what it means for brands. Now, I think in that kind of macro environment, there are a number of things that we'd almost certainly prefer to forget, but consumer trust in institutions has been spiraling downward for several years as a result of some of the things that are happening in this wider context. And there are multiple factors that have contributed to this, including the handling of the pandemic. You know, it feels like a while ago now, but the reverberations of it is still very much echoing. We have the highly polarized political climate. There was further evidence of that internationally, you know, in the last couple of weeks. But this is increasingly kind of exacerbated by seemingly never-ending political scandals. You know, Labour have already been rocked by multiple since taking office, and I'm sure there'll be more to come in the imminent future. And this translates directly into very low public confidence in political leadership. But we also see this climate of mistrust echoing elsewhere as well, especially in vital institutions like the police, as highlighted on this slide. And even that last bastion of genuine infallibility and virtue, the Premier League referee, is now mired in scandal. Can we trust anything anymore?
And Edelman's trust barometer from 2024 starkly illustrates the extent to which this kind of theme that Tom's been talking about has occurred, with trust in political institutions at its lowest point since 2012 in the UK. And when looking at the trust index that they produce, which is the average percent trust in NGOs, business, government, and the media to do what is right, the UK has seen the biggest negative change in their rating in the last year, dropping by 4 points to rank amongst the least trusting countries tracked on this measure and significantly below the global average. And there are some other fascinating stats that we saw in this report that again reinforce that sense of trust being slightly on the wane in general and reflecting an ever more skeptical population, with nearly 2/3 believing that government leaders are purposely trying to mislead people by saying things they know are false or are gross exaggerations, less than a quarter considering the government to be honest and fair, and governments also now being viewed as significantly less able than businesses to be competent and ethical.
We looked at lots of different sources as we were pulling together this pack for today, and this was another data point that we wanted to share. So this is 2024 research from the Charity Commission for England and Wales, examining the UK public's trust in different institutions, and it further underscores what we've just been reflecting on. So while cynicism towards political leadership is especially pronounced, looking down there right at the very bottom, the lowest trust levels of any of the different institutions considered, there's also quite a high level of cynicism shown towards other pretty vital parts of our society, not least newspapers. Historically, a really vital source of information and perspective. Now, the ordinary person on the street is far more trusted. I think another thing to call out here, and it's really interesting to note, is the decidedly mixed levels of trust that are accorded to private companies.
And we're seeing a growing trend in consumers actually being more vigilant and wary towards brands as well. And while this is far from universal, there are certain demographics who are particularly attuned to things like business practices and a brand's capacity to deliver consistently.
So again, there were lots of different data points that we discovered that really emphasize this, but we're going to just call attention to a recent study by Trustpilot. So this study illustrated that 90% of online shoppers have chosen not to purchase from a company because of its perceived bad reputation, from a general lack of trust in that company. Almost half of online shoppers had actually actively recommended a brand to others, specifically because of its stance on social issues. And among Gen Z in particular, over 8 in 10 of them, the up-and-coming generation of consumers, said that they'd actively recommend others to stop purchasing from a brand that they thought had a bad reputation.
So it's in this context that we need to reflect on and understand how consumers react to brands that haven't been acting in a trustworthy manner. So each of the high-profile examples we're going to focus on next showcase how consumers' best interests are arguably not front and center in the thinking of brands. And it's therefore clear how consumers can perceive that corporate profit as being prioritized above all else. And the scale of coverage and outcry that you will recognize, I'm sure, as we talk through these, makes a lot of sense when you consider that backdrop that we've just been discussing.
So we're going to start with a pretty high-profile example that we've labelled "Not So Rock and Roll," and I'm sure there are a few of us on this call with personal experience of this, so I'll try not to pick at the scars too much. And to be fair to Oasis, they did warn us many, many, many years ago that we shouldn't trust them too much or put our lives in the hands of their rock and roll band. But the recent Ticketmaster controversy highlights rising frustration over practices within the entertainment industry that are completely at odds with building trust. So just to recap, fans seeking tickets to the anticipated Oasis reunion, arguably the biggest concert of 2025, encountered dynamic pricing, causing prices to spike dramatically from an already high advertised price of just under £150 up to £355. Most were blindsided by this, with the prices surging during the online checkout process after hours spent in Ticketmaster's queue, leading to accusations that the company was actively exploiting demand and the consumers seeking these tickets. There's been a huge backlash to this, led by the UK's Competition and Markets Authority, who are opening an investigation to whether Ticketmaster's pricing lacks sufficient transparency. Lisa Nandy, the UK's Culture Secretary, has waded in, criticising the inflated pricing and describing the practice as thoroughly depressing for ordinary fans, and adding that this incident underscores the need for stronger consumer protections. The consumer advocacy group also got involved, calling for refunds and claiming that the lack of clear pricing communication was probably in breach of consumer protection laws. As of today, to the best of my knowledge, no refunds have been forthcoming, though they have kindly promised that they won't be using dynamic pricing for the North American leg of their upcoming tour. Snide remarks aside, this outcry not only brought scrutiny to Ticketmaster's practices, but also reignited a broader conversation about fair pricing, standards, and ticketing transparency in the UK entertainment industry.
So looking beyond the entertainment industry now, we'll turn to something that is closer to home. Since 2010, UK water bills have increased by around a third, which is partly driven by inflation and partly driven by increased investment in infrastructure. And recently, bills went up by an average of 7.5% this year, which marks one of the largest annual increases since the early 2000s. And water companies argue that these price increases support essential upgrades, things like reducing leaks and improving water quality. But these increases have triggered significant public backlash as water companies face growing criticism for widespread leaks and sewage frequently discharging into rivers and to our coastlines as well. So critics really argue that the higher bills have not actually translated into meaningful improvements, as we're still seeing millions of litres of water lost daily to leaks, and we still continue to hear these really high-profile stories of sewage incidents. And the outcry has understandably spurred calls for accountability, transparency, and stronger regulation over water companies. And while we've chosen to highlight water companies in this example, we could just have easily have shone a light on energy providers or telco providers who are often called out for practices that have a corrosive effect on trust as well.
For our last example in this section, we're going to look at a financial services brand. So it's about the backlash towards Barclays that we saw over the summer and beyond. And it stems from significant consumers' dissatisfaction regarding Barclays' financial ties to companies involved in fossil fuels and controversial arms sales. This boycott intensified following a backlash against Barclays' sponsorship of a number of major UK music events and festivals, where its presence came under really heavy criticism. Activists, bands, and concert goers all highlighted the disconnect between this sponsorship, which is promoting creativity and inclusivity, while simultaneously profiting from perceived nefarious practices. This inconsistency prompted protests at festivals and events, with artists, demonstrators, and social media users calling for organisers to reconsider their partnerships with the bank. We saw a number of events cancelling the sponsorship in response to this backlash. Now, these kind of sponsorships are a genuine attempt to boost the bank's image, and particularly among younger, socially conscious audiences. Yet rather than enhancing consumer trust, the sponsorships have actually worked to amplify criticism as consumers became increasingly vocal about corporate ethics and were demanding greater alignment between brand values and brand actions. This scrutiny has spurred discussion around corporate accountability more generally, pushing events and brands to reevaluate partnership choices to avoid alienating their target audiences and eroding brand trust in the process.
So, I'm sure you'll agree they were three probably pretty extreme examples, but they all reflect brands that have been really out of sync with their customers and not acting in ways that reflect their best interests. The cynics amongst you may question the extent to which this really matters. Ultimately, each of these brands or industries are highly successful and lucrative regardless. But our research consistently emphasizes the importance of building and maintaining trust. Because when trust is established, customers are much more likely to make repeat purchases, close themselves off to competitors, advocate the brand to others, and be less sensitive to price increases.
So just reflecting on each of these in turn, we recently talked with long-term Aldi customers as they walked around an Aldi store, happily putting product after product into their baskets without even looking at the prices. In the context of the wider cost of living crisis that was affecting the same people we were speaking to, and the wider scrutiny of supermarket pricing that we were seeing elsewhere, it was really striking to see this confidence that the consumers displayed in Aldi's pricing. And even though they were confirmed price-sensitive shoppers, they just implicitly trusted Aldi to always deliver against the promise of low prices and great value, to the extent that they didn't even stop to question the price points of the products that they were purchasing.
And when consumers find a brand they trust, they often close themselves off to the competition. We all have so much choice and so many decisions to make in our day-to-day lives. So it can be a relief when we find that brand that we can trust, because we don't have to then spend time or energy looking elsewhere. We just tend to shop on autopilot. I'm sure there will be many fans of the Big Mac on this call who wouldn't even consider looking at a Whopper or even think of entering Burger King. If you're a fan of the Big Mac, you trust that it will always deliver.
Advocacy is a really important outcome of trust as well. And people are typically, as we've seen from the data we reflected on earlier, really wary of recommending a product or a service unless they are really confident that it won't disappoint and make them look foolish. I'm not sure if you've ever met someone with a Peloton that hasn't tried to convince you it's the best thing they've ever bought, but that is a brand that's really been built on the back of advocacy and implicit trust in the quality of that brand to deliver. Tesla's another great example of this, spending far less than competitors do on advertising campaigns because they have so many trusting evangelical customers who believe so much in the cars, the brand and the lifestyle, they'll do the work on the brand's behalf.
And finally, price sensitivity. If you, as a consumer, value and trust in quality, service and experience, you're more likely to accept a premium and, in turn, price rises. And John Lewis is probably the classic example here. People are generally willing to pay more for the same product in a John Lewis store because they trust the brand not only to sell great products, but also they trust the store experience will be enjoyable, and that if anything were to go wrong, they'll be looked after. And they've also recently brought back their never knowingly undersold promise, which again is a further strong commitment to transparency with customer needs front and center. I think it's fair to say that Ticketmaster and Oasis could probably learn a thing or two from John Lewis on this front.
Thinking about that lesser sensitivity to price changes or commanding a premium, this is something that shines through in the brands that we see who are most trusted. So over the next few slides, we've looked at a number of the UK's 2024 most trusted brand award winners to find a selection of examples for you, so you can think on the different themes that unite them and make a brand trusted in the UK. Now, quite often, trusted brands are distinguished by a combination of consistent quality, customer service, and reliability. And this comes through really strongly across these FMCG brands and the way in which they build trust. So Heinz, Fairy, and Warburton's all featured really prominently in the award winners for most trusted brands in 2024. Heinz has a reputation that's built on decades of consistent product quality, particularly when you think on its ketchup and baked beans, which are simply seen as the standard to which all others must aspire. Their primary focus on great taste and quality ingredients means they are a perennial staple for most UK households, even though they command more of a price premium than the equivalent products in their categories. Another great example of this is Warburton's, who dominate in the bread market and are renowned for their family values and great tasting products. Their unwavering commitment to high standards is apparent in everything they do, and is reflected in their packaging and the humorous communications that they use to promote themselves and celebrate what they do. It's no great shock to see them ranking so high in the most trusted lists. And then our final example on this slide is Fairy, synonymous with long-lasting and effective dishwashing products. Fairy is another household name that has built their reputation through a focus on high performance and NPD rather than an emphasis on value. The consistency and dependability of their products has built great trust and loyalty from their customers. And as with Heinz, they're the gold standard against which others are compared, and consumers are accordingly willing to pay a premium for their products.
So from FMCG, moving into the beauty sector, the example we wanted to call out here was Dove, because they're really interesting in terms of the way that they've gone about building trust, both a factor of the skincare benefits of the core products that they deliver, but also for its commitment to inclusivity and positive body image. And Dove's campaigns have highlighted things like self-esteem and natural beauty, which again really resonates well with UK consumers who value both ethical and effective skincare.
And the last example that has been featuring really high on the most trusted brands list is M&S. And they've been on a really remarkable journey in recent years, with their impressive 2024 financial results a testimony to the great work that they've been doing and the trust that their customers have in the brand. Now, underpinning this is an explicit stated commitment that they have to building trust, as reflected by their vision to be the most trusted retailer, doing the right things for customers with quality products at the heart of everything they do. So they lean into this in a really big way in food, where that focus on quality, ethically sourced ingredients shines through. But you can also see it strongly in their clothing, offering really well-made, hand-me-down quality clothes at a reasonable price, elevated by well-judged partner collections. All of this is supported by generally excellent customer service, as integral to their brand as the products they sell.
So just kind of wrapping up now, ultimately, each of these brands that we've kind of called out for their positivity from a trust point of view emphasize things like consistency, quality, and therefore trustworthiness, which really resonates strongly with UK consumers. And while, as we've seen, brands go about delivering this in slightly different ways, their ability to meet and often exceed consumer expectations has helped them to maintain loyalty, even when prices are slightly higher than the competition. Importantly, they respect most, if not all, of our key trust pillars, which, as a reminder, are delivering consistently, transparency, honesty, and accountability, strong customer service, social proof, and engaging with feedback. And while it's impossible to get them all right all of the time, as some of our examples show, keeping these things front of mind will go a long way to building and maintaining trust with the ever-vigilant British consumer.
I think across all these examples, we were really keen to tease out just how multifaceted trust is. I think we often in the research industry try and treat it in quite simple terms, and it's actually an incredibly complex topic. Now, that has clear implications when it comes to measuring it and evaluating it from a brand perspective in market research. There's not really one easy single way of measuring what it is and why it matters to your brand. And that is exactly what the focus of the webinar, and the final webinar in our series next week, is going to be on.
Oh, thank you both so much. There's some really great stats and examples there, and the Oasis tickets are still very raw for me personally. So I'm going to open up the floor and see if we've got any questions. So do feel free to come forward, don't be shy. I have got one already, that is, how do you go about rebuilding trust once you have lost it?
Do you want to take this one, Tom?
Yeah, happy to. I think it's a really interesting question. There's probably lots of examples of brands who have maybe lost that trust through some sort of scandal, or maybe not living up to what it is that they've kind of stood for previously. So I think in terms of gaining that trust back, it's obviously a long-term play. It can take time to, if that trust has been eroded, it can erode quite quickly, but it does take time to build that back up. And I think depending on the brand or what the backdrop is to how they lost that trust, I think some of the pillars here around that sort of consistency, transparency, kind of doing the right thing definitely help to go a long way to restoring that. So I think it is very much, if you have lost that trust, it's a commitment to actually, being able to build that back up over a long period of time.
Great, thank you, Tom. Another one here. Do you think that Gen Z, however you want to say, have higher expectations from brands? It's a very good question.
I think from the data we've seen, they're definitely more attuned to consistency and look out for evidence of hypocrisy in how brands conduct themselves. They're more likely to scrutinize whether people's words are matched by their actions. And you can see that in how vociferous they are in their criticism when they perceive this to have not been done. They are looking for greater transparency and accountability in how brands conduct themselves. And they were really kind of driving that Barclays backlash more so than other demographics. So I do think they're more attentive to it, and perhaps just less weary as maybe the older generations are, who've seen it all before and are perhaps more cynical towards how brands show up.
Great, thank you. And then finally, we've got, what do you think this means in terms of measuring trust when it comes to market research?
So that's going to be really the core focus of the session next week. So I don't want to put too many spoilers in there. But I do think we've had a tendency to try and simplify trust, particularly when you think about kind of brand tracking. It's often covered off really quite simply in a like statement like, "Is a brand I trust?" And that's overlooking the nuance and subtleties that happen and are relevant to every brand. I think the context that the brand operates in within the category is going to mean trust is slightly different. And also the way what the brand wants to focus on means that trust might be quite different for them too. So I think it's really important to try and reflect on that and ensure that you're not taking a kind of reductive approach towards trust, because I think there's quite a few different strands that you need to reflect on to ensure that you're measuring it and capturing it properly.
That's great. Thank you, Tom. If as I mentioned before at the beginning of the call, if you think of any questions after the session, please get in touch with us. I think that might be it for our questions, but we'll look forward to seeing you next week for our third and final webinar, which is the crucial importance of defining and measuring trust. This will be a collaboration with Aura. So if you haven't already signed up for it, please feel free to get in touch with myself, and I'll happily forward you the details of that. But thank you again for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today, and thank you, Tom Coombes and Tom Dreaves, for talking us through that great session. We hope everyone's enjoyed themselves.